Hey fam, Shabbat Shalom. The question today is, when is enough enough? And I'm talking about relationship wise. When is it time to walk away? And I think it differs from person to person, from relationship to relationship rather, because each marriage has its own individual uniqueness, because it's two different people, who are not the same at all. So I think that the dynamics in different marriages may be different because none of us are the same, right? So you might have in a marriage where the husband is doing all the cooking and cleaning and the wife is working. I grew up that way. My dad, he didn't want to work for the people who were in charge. Put it like that. So he was the one who stayed at home. He cooked and cleaned and did a quite good job doing it. Mom, she went to work. So I grew up in that type of dynamic. And so you have these dynamics that exist today as well. It seems a little odd, because mostly men are the providers. And so depending upon what the situation is in your particular marriage, then if it works for you, it works for you. Now, in a marriage, there's different dynamics and positions according to the couple, but there's also the things that one party in the marriage might be doing that's detrimental to the relationship, and it causes stress as far as staying with them, because you just don't, you're tired of repeating yourself. And some of our bad habits follow us for a lifetime, and a lot of us are satisfied and comfortable in our messes, and therefore we don't even try to do anything to change our ways that are not right. Now, the person that has to deal with that, it takes a toll on them after a while. And a lot of times when we first meet, you're younger, right? In life, we tend to grow, we blossom, we change. People say, oh, I would never change, I will always be the same. But if you're not changing, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying. Just like a plant. A plant has to grow. Just like a butterfly. A butterfly has to blossom. A caterpillar has to blossom into a butterfly. And so that's our story in life. If we don't change for the better, then we're not creating a new person. And sometimes in a marriage, that's what happens. One person changes and the other person doesn't. And now I get it when people say, we grew apart. I'm like, how can you grow apart? It is quite possible to grow apart. Because if you're not headed in the same direction and have an understanding that the other person is changing and not try to interfere, because that's another thing. Sometimes a marriage can still work when one person is changing, because we change at different times in our lives according to circumstances, or just being sick of being who we are and wanting to do something about it. And sometimes even if the person that's changing will still decide to be with the other spouse, they might not bother you to change. They're just changing, hoping that you will see the difference in them, and then that would encourage you to do the same. But then you have some people who, when they're changing and their spouse is not, they don't have a lot of patience to deal with them. And so they will walk out and leave. Now, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing to do. I guess it would depend on the circumstances and what has been said over the years and how bad and severe it is. I can't speak to everybody's relationship. But I wanted to make this video because our relationships with one another are very important. I'm still learning myself. I have a sister I listen to on Instagram. Her name is Karima, and she's more for teaching us women how to handle our men, how not to manipulate them, but to get the best out of our marriage and honor God and our husbands. And so I'm learning from her, and I'm 55. I haven't been married for the majority of my life, like a lot of people that's 55 maybe have been. Some people met in their 20s and they were married up until now, my age, and so they know how to deal with one another or whatever. When you're single for a long time and you have certain ideas and views about men because of your experiences with maybe your dad, all the men in your family, and then the men on the street, and then in your relationship, sometimes your point of view it gets blurred, if that's the good word to use. It gets obscured. What's the word? Anyway, the word I'm trying to find to describe how it is, sometimes that perception gets marred. That's it. I think I got it. Right? So now you don't view men in the light that we ought to. You clump them all together. And I think men are doing the same thing with women. When you have so many bad experiences with women, you begin to just clump us all together. And it's not fair because we're all not the same. And I guess because we feel like we've had so many bad experiences with the opposite sex, you just give up. But guess what? It's a big world, family. And there are men in the world who know their rightful places, just like there are women in the world who know their rightful places. Can we look at the world and see that at large this world is a crazy place to be? Yes. So we know that most people are not doing the right thing. But when I say when is enough enough, I think that question is reserved for individuals, and it's not the same across the board because all relationships are not the same across the board. Different strokes for different folks. But I do believe that I know for a fact that we need to have God in our relationships in order for us to succeed because He keeps us in line with what's right. The righteousness and holiness part comes in when the Most High is the center, is the top of that pyramid of the marriage. Because with Him in place, we're not going to be disrespectful to one another. We're going to have a little more patience because you know what? We have to remember that with God, His patience and His grace and mercy upon us is lopsided because we don't deserve it, right? So what if we extended a little of that to one another to help push one another? Now, I'm not talking about being in a volatile situation where there are children involved and the spouse is doing things that is going to definitely affect the children for the worse in the future. I'm not talking about that. We know that there's a line that should not be drawn. A line that should not be crossed, where it could get so bad where cops are involved and maybe violence is involved and children are being abused and neglected. We're not talking about situations like that, but we are talking about our emotions. And my prayer last night, because there was a situation that occurred between my husband and I, and when I prayed, I said, Father, help me to be controlled by the Holy Spirit and not by my emotions. And I believe that should be the prayer of all of us because we get angry, we get upset, we get disappointed. And when we do, we lash out in a not so righteous way, which is problematic in our marriages because we can't treat one another like that. And sometimes the things that we say, we wouldn't say it to a best friend, we wouldn't say it to a child, but as far as spouses go, sometimes we just say whatever we feel like saying to the other one, thinking it's okay because we're angry and we have the right to say those things. But if you don't respect and honor one another, the marriage will fall apart. You know, we tend to get numb and start to just not care anymore. And, you know, if one of the couple is trying their best to make things worse and the other one is not helping, it could become a very daunting and tiring task, right? And so I like to compare everything to my relationship with God. And I do it for a reason because I know that His patience should have ran out on us a long time ago. And He's God. But we're so impatient with one another, right? We don't like to wait for somebody to grow. We don't want to help one another along the way. We're like, I want it like this and I want it right now. I want it that way. And if you don't want it that way, then you got to get out of here and get out. We're going to break up because I can't deal with you and your nonsense. But you have to look at the big picture. How many times has the Lord warned us about certain things and we just kept doing it? How long did it take us to get it together? And how patient was He while He waited for us to get it together? You know, so I think that we should apply our relationship with the Most High God, how He treats us, how He's waiting on us, to how we treat one another. And that's the rule. The golden rule is to love God. It's hot now, y'all. I done got the windows open and stuff. Love Him with all your might and love one another. Love one another. That's all He asks us to do. And I think we find it so difficult to do because I think a lot of us don't even love ourselves. And then when we think we got it right, we become self-righteous and we think we're better than the other person, right? So you start to run out of patience because you're growing and you're setting goals for yourself and you're doing certain things, but your spouse seems to be stuck. And I'm going to give some advice. When you see your spouse is stuck in a rut, If you are a righteous person, what you ought to be doing is getting on your knees, seeking the throne of God on behalf of your partner for strength. You just keep doing what you're doing. Do the right thing, because I'm telling you, it's almost very difficult for someone to see somebody else changing for the better and they want to stay stuck right where they are. And if they do desire to stay stuck, it's because something is really, really wrong. Because I don't believe that any of us want to really stay the same. I think a lot of us are just afraid of change. We're afraid to fail. And sometimes it takes a lot of failure to get to the point where you get better. So when is enough enough? When do you give up on your spouse? Should you give up on your spouse? What if you're missing out on a good thing? And then there is the flip side. Staying with somebody, because I've heard people say they were in relationships for years and the person was awful for years. And that's wasting some good time. That's wasting a lot of precious time being miserable in a relationship. Well, I would say this. Conversation need to be had constantly between yourself and your spouse. You should express yourself when you're calm, not when you're angry and using cuss words and using words that put the person down and name calling. You know, it's kind of hard to even think that we adults talk to each other like that sometimes, but I know it happens a lot in a lot of relationships, because some of us get angry, and when we can't control the situation, that's how we react. You know, we react in a negative way. God is not pleased with it, and neither is your spouse. Nobody wants to be spoken to like a child. Nobody wants to be looked down upon. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be respected and loved. And knowing that should be brought to the table when there are discussions that are important to have with your spouse. We need to let each other know how we feel and start to make moves toward getting better and growing, because that's what helps us to understand our partner more, and helps us to see that, okay, he cares about me, or okay, she cares about me because she's putting forth an effort. And don't think because a person is not putting forth an effort to better themselves. I'm not talking about the way they treat you, but to better themselves in the ways that you think they can or should. Because we see one another's potential. We see one another's potentials in our marriages. And we're telling each other, listen, you're good at this and you're good at that. And when you see a person not flourishing, that could be damaging to your marriage too. It's upsetting to the spouse to see you just dying internally because you're not growing and not moving forward and upward, when it's very possible that you can. So just pray for one another. Don't stop reminding one another of how great you are, all the wonderful things about one another. Don't stop reminding one another of that. Hug, kiss, and talk. Conversation and communication is the best thing that any relationship can have. And also laughing together. Find things to laugh about. Now, that's one thing we don't come up short in my marriage. Me and my husband, we laugh all the time. Sometimes when we angry, we bust out, start laughing. We just silly with like that. You know, we'll laugh and stuff. But laughter is medicine to the soul for real. It smooth things over. It might not take away the problem, but it will stop you from being so intense in that particular moment. You know what I'm saying? And so remember to laugh. Have fun together. Hug one another and kiss, because when you connect like that, when you grasp your partner and like hug them heart to heart, that is powerful. And then a lot of times we get mad and we don't want to touch one another. We get upset. We don't want to even be in the same room with one another. That's not a good idea, because that's a time when Satan could come in and interfere and then push you even farther apart. And we don't want that. And I know life could be stressful for everybody. And so sometimes you're just overwhelmed and you just want to give up. But a lot of us don't like to be alone, right? So what you going to do? Meet somebody else and have to go through the same thing and figure out how to navigate through a new relationship? Yeah, I'd rather stick with what I got. Work with what I got. But that's my particular story. And like I said, we're not talking about dead-end relationships where some crazy stuff is going on, where children are involved or being neglected and abused, and you yourself are being abused. We're not saying that. I'm never condoning that kind of behavior. I would never encourage anybody to stay in no mess like that. But I'm just talking about the faults we have as human beings and how our tolerance level just may be so little that we're not giving our spouse a shot. The question was, when is enough enough? When you love somebody, it's never too much, right? It's never too much, because we like to throw that word love, love, love out there. But love is not a feeling, because feelings fade and they fluctuate. They change from moment to moment. So when you love someone, it's an act. Are you showing your spouse love? Because that's what we all desire. We want to be treated well. That's how we show love. All right, family. Peace, love, and blessings to you.